welcome everybody to the JVM lunch. This is the first of a new session that we're running at the Manchester Java community. It's going to be a different kind of session to what we've normally done. It's going to be more discussion-based, chat-based. For this first one, there's myself, Nick Ebbett. So I'm a principal engineer currently working at Log4Shell, and I help run the Manchester Java community. And we've also got John Bullock.
Hi everyone, I work for CGG, a geoscience company, as a senior developer in their data division. I'm also the creator and maintainer of JBake, a JVM based and open source static site generator.
Cool. So yeah, like I said, this is the first, hopefully not the last, but so we'll see how things go. So I think for future, we'd hope to kind of expand the people kind of on this kind of session, so maybe get some guests on and things like that. But for this first one, you've got me and John. So first off, we'd just like to there's a couple of kind of key things like happening in the community at the moment that we'd like to call out. First of all, on the 14th of January, which is tomorrow, from the point that we're recording this, we've got the close of the call for papers with DevoxxUK. So if you're thinking of submitting, you might be watching this after that date's passed, but if you're thinking of submitting, get your submissions in. Also, there's a pretty cool conference coming up on the 20th of February. It's the J Champions Conf. So that's a conference that's run by Java champions, essentially. So there's a load of great content going to be presented in that conference from lots of really kind of interesting and important people in the Java community. And finally, from the Manchester Java community's perspective, on the 3rd of February, we've got Heinz Kabutz. He's the creator of the Java Specialist newsletter and runs the J-Crete conference out in Crete. So we're really excited about that. He's going to be talking to us about something concurrency related, yet to be confirmed exactly the details of that. So look out for that via our normal community channels. Yeah, so for today's kind of chat, we've got a couple of, I suppose, current topics, things happening in the Java ecosystem that we're going to have a little chat around. The first thing we're going to talk about is the Log4Shell vulnerability and exploit that's been that landed on us all just before Christmas, the weeks before Christmas, and probably disrupted quite a few people's, I suppose, working life for that period of time. So we're not going to go into too much detail around what Log4Shell is, because it's been done to death. But maybe, John, do you want to kind of share a bit of a high level kind of view of what it is, and then we can talk about some other parts of it?
Yeah, so as a, should we say, a brief summary, Log4Shell has been branded Log4Shell like most of these other major vulnerabilities. They get a brand themselves. A major scored very highly, I think it was 10 in terms of its CVSS score. So I want to say the worst you could possibly get. I'm not too sure about that off the top of my head, whether 10 is the maximum or not. A vulnerability reported in Log4j library that allowed remote code execution based on, I believe it was primarily reported via the JNDI lookup mechanism, but I think since then, there's been much more analysis done on the code too, and there's been a lot more related vulnerabilities reported in the library related to other potential vulnerabilities. But that's it in a nutshell. So obviously with Log4j, it's used by a lot of other systems. It's a dependency for a lot of other projects. So it's obviously potentially very widespread of vulnerability in a lot of systems.
Yeah, so I suppose from my perspective, thinking about the impact that it had on myself and probably more generally the organization I was working in. I suppose I think it was the 10th of December it first kind of came out, and at that point I don't think there was even a CVE in the database or anything, so people were kind of, obviously, I suppose organizations were scrambling to kind of react to this and know what to do. So within my organization, we deploy lots of applications. They're all depending on things like Spring and other types of frameworks. So you've got all these kind of transitive dependencies. There's a lot of complexity there. And I think the first challenge we kind of hit was how do we know what is actually using this library? And we actually got pretty lucky. So we use, if you've heard of OWASP, the Open Web Application Security kind of stuff, they provide a plugin. I think it's a great old Maven type plugin called Dependency Check, and it scans your application configuration and looks at the dependencies to understand, what libraries you're using, and then it matches them up against the CVE databases.
Okay.
So the reason we got lucky is that we kind of provide that as a platform feature in AutoTrader, and that essentially scans everybody's applications when they build before they get to the point of deployment. But one of the artifacts that comes out of that is a JSON report, and that JSON report, we also then store that on the platform. So we had data there that was kind of giving us this view of our whole estate of what dependencies were actually being used by applications. And it allowed us to, with a bit of effort, one of our lead engineers spent a bit of time working out how we could expose the detail in that data set to users, so we could quite quickly see what our dependency tree looked like in reality. So yeah, we got pretty lucky that we were already using this tool and had this set up for other reasons, but we're then able to kind of utilize that data set to make queries essentially against our estate and say, right, what is actually using Log4j? And I think the interesting thing was there was obviously there was false positives in there. So that was part of the kind of challenge as well. So there's like Spring, I think, was pulling in the Log4j API, which wasn't actually vulnerable. It's a Log4j call, isn't it? So it's kind of understanding some of those nuances at first and trying to work out, are we vulnerable? Are we not? By default, a lot of our Spring apps were using Logback and SLF4j, and so they were okay, although they had this dependency of the API in their transitive kind of dependency tree. So yeah, that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I suppose initially, so I spent a lot of time before Christmas information gathering, going through that. We weren't as fortunate to have a tool like that in play for us, right. But it was trying to figure out what is the scope of how it affects us, trying to figure that out, manually looking through from, I also had to do this from a JBake perspective. Luckily, we made the decision to use, like you said, we use Logback and the simple logging facade for Java instead of Log4j. But that has subsequently been reviewed in this as the fallout of Log4j, and there's been vulnerabilities reported in Logback, not to the same severity, but there's been a lot more eyeballs on these kind of logging frameworks, and it's revealed vulnerabilities that hadn't been revealed or seen before. So Logback has had a vulnerability report, and it's nowhere near as severe, but it still requires then a change to be made, which has been made. But it's so many things. There's so many vulnerability scanners out there that can try and identify these things. Sometimes they're not able. It's not as simple as just doing an automated scan on public-facing systems and go, is this vulnerability? Especially with, as my understanding of the Log4j vulnerability, it was very much user input was a big source of how the vulnerability could be exploited. So, if you look at, I suppose if you look at log files now, there's tons of evidence of automated scans. And it's quite interesting to see how they try to obfuscate those tests to see if you're vulnerable to these. So from an automated vulnerability scan, it's not as simple as just doing it's hard to scan multiple web systems and say, is it vulnerable to this? Because you almost need to have inherent knowledge of the application to know where is user input required or requested. And that's maybe a mechanism or an attack vector to say, well, that's where I could put in the vulnerable or the exploit and see if it then you can I think a lot of the scans I saw or logs I've seen are people validating, like whenever there's a major vulnerability in any public system, you just see automated tests scanning across the internet to say, is there any systems vulnerable?
Yeah, almost like kind of this optimistic, let's go and see if we can find anything that's insecure and lets us.
Yes.
No, some of it's probably just for fun. People just say, "Can I find anything?" But I'm sure there'll be some malicious actors in there.
Yeah, unfortunately, there might be some that are, looking and reporting issues proactively. It's not always malicious actors, but unfortunately, they are out there as well.
Yeah, so I suppose actually there's two kind of sides to this, isn't there? There's like, if you can't really understand whether you're using those dependencies and you're actually have vulnerable code, can you test the application from outside in to see if you can invoke some kind of vulnerability and prove that there's a problem? I think our like security team took responsibility of that, and there was probably all these techniques got published, didn't they, like of how you could exploit it. So they kind of obviously built up some tooling to help them try and kind of exploit our own applications to see if we were vulnerable. But yeah, I think like from my kind of perspective where I was, it was more about, right, how do we get people's applications up to date effectively? Identify first of all, and then upgrade them was the second step, and get them off these what are said to be vulnerable versions. It's not to say you aren't running other vulnerable things in your application, but according to the CVE kind of database, are we running a version that has been proven to be vulnerable, essentially?
The other thing I noticed from this was some of the commentary. Obviously, there's then, because of this vulnerability, a lot of attention was brought onto the Log4j project. And I noticed that there was a lot of debate. I suppose I think there was other people in the Java and security. Let's not critique too hard the developers of the project. They're doing this on a voluntary basis. Very often, a lot of the open source projects, it's a voluntary basis, not paid for. And that, I noticed there was a whole debate started about open source funding. How can we expect unpaid developers to proactively and to be fair to the Log4j team, I think they responded at a fantastic rate, but there was no obligation, there was no expectation, there was no requirement for them to respond. I'm sure the developers, I don't know them, but I'm sure they've got potentially day jobs that take up a big part of their time. And I suppose this reminded me of the situation around JUnit a good few years ago. Whenever there's a report or what's the most dependent on Java library, JUnit usually comes out top. It's one of the most used depended on libraries in the ecosystem by a clear margin, yet it was supported by just a very few small team of developers and volunteers. And if I remember rightly, there was a sponsorship campaign launch, which I think led to the creation of what we now know as JUnit 5. And I think the debates are probably still going on, but should there be better funding for open source? This is probably a debate for another day. But I've noticed there's some interesting debate going on, especially on social media around this.
And I suppose it kind of depends on the project as well, because like some projects do get sponsorship, not in terms of necessarily money to the developers who are doing it like in their own time, but more sponsorship from a company allowing their engineers to spend time working on these projects. Another one that springs to mind that's so kind of important to the ecosystem is Maven. And I remember speaking with one of the key maintainers of Maven a few years ago, and there was literally like a few people responsible for kind of the whole Maven ecosystem, and that's obviously quite scary when you think about it. Like this build tool that's so fundamental. It's kind of interesting.
I think it's you could class Maven, Log4j, JUnit as fundamental to the wider industry, or especially the Java industry. They are foundational for a lot of systems, and it's times like this where you realize there is not that organizational team behind these projects that you may think or you expect there should be sometimes. And that's something maybe that as a wider, as the industry, we maybe should be better at.
So Log4j, is it part of any of the foundations? Is it Apache?
It's Apache. It's part of the
Right.
Apache Software Foundation, as far as I know. I'm not an expert. I don't profess to be an expert on how. I know the Apache Software Foundation gets sponsorship and has sponsors, but I don't know how funding happens.
I bet they got quite a few emails, didn't they, from big like organizations saying, what's going on? How can you prove to us that your software is secure? We use it in all these applications. I bet that was an interesting time.
Yes, I've seen some. Well, I felt it. I don't know whether. I suppose I'm looking back at the major branded vulnerabilities, like Heartbleed was. I seem to want to say that's the first branded vulnerability that had its own website, a logo.
It went mainstream, at least, anyway.
It went mainstream. Yeah, I think that's the major thing. We had clients proactively ask for a response about Log4Shell, and I don't remember that happening for any of the other branded vulnerabilities. Now, maybe it's due to the publicity Log4Shell got.
I think it is, isn't it? People get scared and they possibly don't fully understand it. But I mean, they rightly ask of your service providers who you depend on.
Yes.
You ask the question, don't you? Are you secure?
Yeah.
Because it is important. I think like in AutoTrader, we essentially had to kind of get a standard message that we could communicate to any clients and provide them with that level of confidence that we were doing what we could and we weren't vulnerable, as to the best of your kind of knowledge, essentially.
I know. And obviously I think it was changing on a daily basis.
Well, that was the problem.
There was an update. What was the latest update today? Is there any more being found? I think some of the mitigations that you'd put in place from one day, I think the next day they could be now vulnerable for another exploit. It was a changing story.
But I totally agree. Like, people are working on these things. A lot of people are volunteering their own free time to work on them, and the people who did work on Log4j and other kind of software that was like open source and spending the free time, that period where they were kind of probably doing late night stuff, they deserve a lot of credit, essentially. Like, I know for a fact, like, even if you're getting paid for it, you will reluctantly kind of work through the night or do late nights because it's like a crunch time, isn't it? So they definitely deserve a lot of credit for kind of putting that time in.
A lot of respect.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Have you ever had anything like that with JBake, where you've had to kind of, something critical's happening and you've had to put those extra hours?
No, thankfully not, because I suppose JBake's more of while it is a library, it's more of a tool. So it's not had that dependent or that situation happen. I have done late nights, but that's more because I felt like I need to finish this. I'm in the zone. And I don't want to lose. It feels like you've got the Midas touch, everything's, you can see clearly, and you just don't want to fall off out of that zone. But it's a bit different, isn't it? That's because you want to. You're there doing it because you want to. You're probably actually enjoying yourself quite a lot because you're in the flow and you're in the zone, like you say. But no, I've never had. I've not had, thankfully, a situation like that with JBake.
It's interesting, actually. A couple of days ago, I was upgrading some dependencies to one of the apps I was working on. It's a Node.js TypeScript app, server-side app, and just update. We do like update dependencies as regularly as we can, really, to keep up to date. And I was building the tool, and then I just saw this like weird text come out in the console, and it said "liberty, liberty, liberty," and then lots of like kind of scrambled text. I was like, "Oh my god, what's happened here? I think I've been hacked." And it turns out we use a colors library to like colorize some text, and there's this I think there's an open source maintainer who's obviously got a bit annoyed by for some reason around kind of maintaining some. I think there was colors.js and faker.js.
I did see this, yes.
Did you? Yeah. So they made a change to their code to put I think it was an infinite loop in some of the code. So it wasn't malicious as such, but it was just like, here, I'm going to make a statement. I'm not supporting this anymore. New patch version with this kind of problem in it. And then, that kind of blew up a little bit as well over Twitter over the weekend.
Yeah, I did read about this. it's a difficult situation. I can understand, having read a bit more about the developer and his reasons.
Right.
I can understand at a certain level why they've done what they've done. But as you know, I can also see it from an external perspective, like, you know, from your initial view was, have I been hacked? What's going on? And I suppose, I don't know for definite, but it feels like it's been done to create that reaction. That is what was the target. And it's, you know, they've succeeded in that.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it doesn't affect their future opportunities, because like it's making a very big public statement, isn't it?
It is.
But yeah, I mean, for us, obviously, and for probably a lot of people who've just kind of been hit by that, it's a case of, right, what are the alternatives to switch to now? Because we've obviously pinned our versioning of that to the last good version before that release came out. But yeah, it's kind of, we need to swap off it essentially and kind of pick up another library that's going to, you know, solve the same problem for us. But yeah, it's interesting. It shows like how obviously mistakes can easily be made, and software libraries can be vulnerable, but also there is intentional kind of things that can be done. And obviously this one was more of a political type statement, I would say, around kind of open source maintainers and things like that, and like trying to make a stance. But at the same time, I think there was one a few years ago, wasn't there? Left shift, was it? Or left pad?
Yes, left pad. Yes, I remember reading this.
So that was another one where, like, yeah, people can just be malicious, and like you've got to be able to, you know, I suppose quickly and hopefully not identify when these things go wrong, and then have strategies for mitigating the problem. And it's not always that simple, I suppose.
I know it. I remember reading about the left pad or left shift situation, and I think at the time, if I remember rightly, NPM was not immutable for the artifacts that were deployed, and I think that's what had created that somebody had withdrawn their.
Did they completely overwrite it essentially?
I'm not too sure.
Replace it with a new one.
Pull it out completely. So of that transitive dependencies, so many were dependent on a package that no longer existed, which broke lots of builds. I don't know since then whether NPM's changed. I don't use it on a regular basis in my day job.
I see. So that was just something that so many things depended on got removed. And actually, I think it was like a couple of lines of code, wasn't it? That was a funny thing about it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And how and the dependency graph for something so simple was massive.
Yeah.
And I suppose I'm comparing to Maven Central, in that, you know, at some point somebody made the decision that Maven Central is immutable, and that if an artifact you deploy is wrong in some way or not right, you can't change that.
Right.
While there are pros and cons to these approaches, maybe something we'll talk about later on in one of the other topics, but you find, I think the software industry looks at maybe other languages and tries to learn from what they do. And something I think Java's been good at is the deliberations they make on changes to the language, to the tooling. There can be quite slow compared to others, but there can be benefits from that pace, or what is perceived to be slow. There are some benefits from that.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, I mean, speaking of other topics, should we kind of move on to something else?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think the other thing on the radar, I mean, there's lots of things, of course, but we've only got so much time. But I think due around the middle of this month, probably next week actually, is around the 18th of January, is the quarterly updates to the Java version. So this is going to be obviously Java 8, Java 11, and Java 17 will be getting patch releases, which will contain security fixes, security updates, bug fixes, that kind of stuff. So that's pretty cool. I think Java 18 has gone into ramp down. So that's not due out until April, I believe. But you know, the release content's being finalized, so that's pretty cool as well. There's some potentially interesting new features in there. but of course it's not an LTS, so it'll be interesting to see how adoption is on that version. I've actually got an interesting little story about so I'm not usually that fussed about quarterly updates, but this 17.0.2 release that's be coming out next week, I've actually got a vested interest in it, because when Java 17 first came out, we were like, yeah, great, let's get on it. And we released a new kind of Docker base image for Java 17, and we started getting various applications migrated to it. But probably after like a week or a few days to a week, we noticed a few applications were starting to have this kind of trend of memory increase. And so we thought, right, well, let's just kind of rule out, Java versions first and just make sure. So we kind of switched back to 11 for these apps, and it went away. It's like, all right, so we've not changed the application, but just by changing the JVM, the Java version,
you could see a change in the behavior.
Yeah, we're starting to see this trend. So kind of dug into it a bit. We've got really good kind of visibility around and metrics around kind of memory usage, both like heap, non-heap. And we were quite quickly able to identify that, heap was fine, non-heap was okay as well. So it was something else, some kind of other native memory usage. But at that point, it became like quite tricky to really pin down what was going on. I don't know if you know, you can get access to like native memory information. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in general, it's only really accessible via J command. So like, or by the command line, you can get these kind of starts, you can do baselines and diffs and things like that. So at first I kind of did a few of those and tried to kind of spot if there's anything going on, but totally kind of didn't really get anywhere. It was a bit of a hard slog, to be honest, because it was a slow burning kind of memory issue. So at that point, I thought, right, I'm going to see if anyone else is having this problem, chucked a message out on Twitter, and actually got a few people said, yeah, I've seen something, but didn't really get any response. So we were kind of like, all right, well, there's definitely something wrong, but we haven't got enough information here to be able to like
point the finger and say,
and say like, it feels like it's a problem here or there in terms of like kind of the native memory usage. So a couple of other people in the organization, they spent quite a bit of time like doing some trial and error, switching out like different distributions. So we use Adoptium, but they was trying like let's just see if there's any differences on like Zulu, Zul's kind of version.
Looking for a change that has an impact on the situation. Possibly,
yeah. I mean, they should generally be the same, shouldn't other than like how they've been kind of built, packaged and things. So in general, they should be the same. One version we did try was GraalVM, and that's a different implementation of some of the kind of key components, and that's Graal as just the the JIT and stuff like that, as opposed to native images, and that was fine. So that, like, we were kind of right. There's definitely something hotspot related here, like in terms of the version of the kind of VM, but still we weren't really kind of getting anywhere, to be honest. But then one of our engineers, they decided to spend a bit more kind of hands-on time, and they looked at I think they wrote essentially a little bit of kind of Java code to take the native memory stats and expose them as metrics, essentially, and get them onto our Prometheus graphs. And like, there's probably various ways you could have done this, but this one was actually really useful because in general, because it was a slow burning problem, this allowed them to deploy their service on Java 17 and quite quickly see which of the native memory kind of components was trending over time. And that just string deduplication just jumped out straight away as being the thing that was trending. So we're like, right, well, we've got a bit more information here. Let's get, I thought I'll jump back on Twitter and put another kind of message out, and somebody responded to it and tagged Alexei Shipolev, who's obviously kind of pretty hot expert in the kind of GC realm. He's kind of been working in it for a long time. And he knows his stuff, and straight away he said, "Oh, maybe there's a leak. We haven't had any regression test failures, but he said he'll take a look." So I was like, "All right, this is they're aware of it now." But it may be a few weeks or even months before like people get time to spend on this. But then like I think a few hours or a day later, I had a message come back saying, "Yeah, there's a problem. I spotted it. Fix has been pushed." And
wow,
it kind of got released. I think it came into like the nightly updates of Java 17. So I went and grabbed that, installed it into our Java 17 base image, kind of deployed that, verified it, and yeah, we had a kind of nice little turnaround there around this kind of string deduplication native memory leak being kind of, took us a while to get to some information that was useful to help kind of understand what the problem was. But once we were able to kind of share that to the right people, they were just quite on it like that straight away, understood it, fixed it, and away we went.
So you got cool. a personal interest in this next release then?
Oh yeah, I'm very excited about 17.0.2.
It's good to see, it's a good thing to see that the community can have an impact on upcoming Java releases. You know, from just putting a Twitter message out there to say, has anyone else seen this? And a few people, and having a bit more information, and to have that feedback. You know, and now that you've got a, you know, it's immediately, as you said, I think you said earlier, you're not normally that interested in the patch releases, but this one has a, you know, you've got an emotional, almost an emotional attachment to this one.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like saying when you post things on Twitter, I never usually post things with that much expectation to get any responses. It's often posted into the void, and people might see it, but you don't really know if they're going to react to it or anything. But I think it's somebody obviously amplified my message and like shared it with the right people, which gave it that kind of visibility. I think that's kind of I suppose an interesting point actually. You know, it's up to us in the community to amplify other people, give them that kind of platform to speak on, because I'm just a random person saying something on the internet. Why would anyone take me kind of seriously ultimately? But somebody's obviously put me in connection with the right person. There's a level of kind of respect or trust that has meant, and then that's given them a bit of kind of, you know, that emphasis to go and look at it a bit more. And obviously Alexis found the problem pretty quickly. It's his domain, and he's kind of knows what to look for, kind of thing.
I suppose from his perspective, he's glad because somebody's taken that time to find a problem in a domain he feels some way responsible for. You know, to say, did you know that there was a problem in the code base? And, you know, that's what you're looking for from a developer, aren't you? You're looking for that feedback, for that, you know, hopefully it encourages the community as a wider community to get more involved, even if it's just from a bug reporting perspective, to say, you know, it's not just the bug itself, but having that targeted information to say, this is the area we think it is. You know, obviously your organization had done that investigation to point the finger, it's here. This is the area where we can see a problem.
We can't be specific, but we know this is the area that's got some kind of problem. No, it's good. I am looking forward to this next release, and hopefully some point next week we can get that live and get everything upgraded onto Java 17. It kind of stalled us a little bit in some ways, so it'd be nice to kind of
close it off.
Yeah, because it was weird. It was a weird one actually, because it didn't affect every service. So, which is like, there must be something about the behavior of certain services. Maybe they're just kind of string heavy, and that's why it was more obvious, whereas other ones weren't. So it'd be nice to kind of get that live and start moving forward, making full advantage of all the new optimizations and obviously language features in 17. So I suppose that kind of leading on to Java 18 then, like, what's your thoughts on the contents? There's a couple of things in there that might be worth kind of calling out.
One thing that I'm personally interested in, and that's obviously from an open source, my JBake perspective, is the built-in web server that is hopefully coming in Java 18. Off the top of my head, I don't have the JEP number. But that's the one I suppose I just have a personal interest in seeing that. Granted, you can easily build a functional web server in a fairly limited number of Java code lines, and I think there's an example using JBang of how to spin up a basic Java web server of a folder. But at least from my perspective, it aligns Java with competing languages that have a built-in web server out of the box, where you can just simply call a command line tool, serve the current contents of the folder out. So I'm eager to see that come into Java. from a personal perspective. That's one as soon as I saw that JEP, I was very interested in that. That's something I thought, oh, that'd be good for Java to have.
Yeah, well, it looks like it's JEP 408. That's the JEP number.
Okay.
I think like from what I've read about it, like, yeah, exactly what you're saying. Like, people want to come to the ecosystem and get something running quickly. It sounds like there's an educational kind of angle to it as well, you know, like, and probably fits in with that getting started quickly kind of perspective. You know, if you're new to the language, or maybe you're a student or something, or any of those different kind of personas, you just want to be able to create something quickly and get to that hello world. I'm running an application.
Yeah, especially.
I think it's, if I'm right, I think from the standalone tool, and it might be limited to like static content, which is fine. But it sounds like it's, you know, potentially quite useful. I'd be interested to see what use cases do come out of it, won't it, in terms of like building on top of that.
Yeah, especially you can create. I see it with JBake myself. You have an idea for a feature and you put it out there, and people use it for the most unexpected reasons. You know, it's viewpoints that I never thought of that, of using it for that reason. And that's what I suppose is good about this feature. It'll be interesting to see how it is utilized by the industry and the ecosystem in various ways.
Yeah, definitely. A couple of other kind of bits and pieces in there. There's UTF-8 by default. So I think that's really around kind of providing consistency. That's what that platform across different platforms. So if you're building an application on, you know, Linux and you're running it on Mac, or if you're running it on either of them, it should by default behave the same in terms of how it handles, you know, strings and text and stuff like that. So that sounds like sensible. I don't know what the impact might be of that on people, but I suppose in theory.
No, my first thought was I've on occasion had to convert Unicode characters. I think there was a command line tool to have to convert them to be able to put the characters in Java. I won't have to do any of that potentially anymore. Yeah, it seems like a sensible thing. I can't think of any obvious reasons why it shouldn't, you know, reasons against being UTF-8.
Yeah. Yeah, JEP 413 code snippets in Java API documentation. So, right, I mean, I'll be honest, I've not wrote much Java doc for a while, to be honest. But that sounds like really useful. So I suppose that's executable code snippets, you know, that you can prove are actual, you know, valid code and embed them into your Java doc.
Yeah, that's. I think having a relevant code sample to the context of where you are looking is a big thing, and it's something that over time I've seen the ASCII Doctor project.
Right.
They had a doclet, some kind of extension that extended Java docs so you could extract certain information out. But I've seen a lot of projects utilize pulling in an actual snippet of a Java source code file into the documentation, and having been able to run the actual Java code and the documentation and say, we don't build the documentation until the examples build successfully, test run,
right? Okay.
You know, so it's, you're not getting, ensures, you know, your samples are valid and work, and that they're not detached from, you know, I've had it where you come to an example bit of code, doesn't work, and you don't really understand why, but it's because of changes elsewhere. At least this brings that coherence.
Right.
So that's what springs to mind. So hopefully that will improve
yeah,
things.
That sounds really useful, doesn't it? Like, yeah, it can be frustrating if you take an example that isn't actually compatible with the version of, you know, the code that it's documenting. So if that is, I'm not sure if that is kind of a goal of this or not, to be honest, but if that is something that it will help support, then that's pretty useful.
I suppose usually you'll have your documentation, but what you really want is that a little snippet of code to give you just that a hint about how to utilize this method. You know, what maybe you need to initialize something else first, or there's some state elsewhere that it will need. It just gives you that, gets you started quicker, essentially.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on adoption then? Like, obviously, Java 18, non-LTS version. I know from a personal, well, I'd say organizational perspective, like we tend to stick to LTS, and there's a couple of reasons for that. The main one really is not having to support too many versions of Java at the same time. It makes it easier as a platform team. So that's more of a kind of a platform decision. Let's support the LTS versions and keep our ecosystem a bit simpler.
We're very similar. We're very similar.
Right. Yeah. Because obviously, however, like people do want the latest and greatest features. But I don't know. What's your thoughts around that?
I suppose my personal preference is I tend to stick to the LTS releases.
Yeah.
As much as the 6 monthly releases happen in between, I see them as almost a good thing to have. But me personally, I look at them as being able to test to see, okay, is there any major changes that we need to understand? What's the impact? So you can almost incrementally build up to the switch to the next LTS. So from, whatever the next, I don't know what the next LTS version number is going to be off the top of my head, but this is down.
It's a good question. It depends, doesn't it? I suppose.
Yes.
Because there's talks currently. I don't know if they've been agreed on. We should probably check that around a proposal to move to a 2-year LTS cycle, and obviously that will change the version number that will be the next LTS.
Yes. I suppose my gut feeling is, I'm in support of that. I'm not against that. As I said earlier, I tend to stick to the LTSs personally. I suppose I don't know whether that's because when I liken the LTS to, the obvious reference point for me would be the Ubuntu releases, and I tend to stick to the LTS releases from a platform perspective, an OS perspective. I may dabble with the intermediate releases just to see what's changed, but I suppose I'm looking for stability in that platform. I'm looking for it to just be what I need it to do, and for everything else to sit on top. So that's my personal preference.
I suppose it depends who's responsible for that platform and that I suppose layer of the system. Let's say, from a platform perspective, supporting LTS versions keeps things simpler. There's less differences and complexity in the overall system to have to think about. As a developer, I might be sat here thinking, actually, I want to use these new features that are in the kind of next version. So I suppose, depending on the organization, you might say to your kind of product teams, if you want to use that version, you own that decision, and you're responsible for the kind of any complexities and any challenges you may face that come with that. I think, from a platform perspective, though, we aim to keep it simple, and also it allows us to focus on building features and capabilities based on those versions without having to worry about changes so frequently.
You're minimizing change, aren't you? You're minimizing.
In general, there isn't a whole lot that's kind of not backwards compatible anyway. But it's one
a
less
risk
thing to
management,
think about,
isn't it? You're trying to minimize risk wherever possible, especially from a support perspective.
Yeah, and I think the problem that happens is people will say pick up 18, but then they might not move to 19, 20, 21, and then 18 stop being patched, and suddenly they're on a version that isn't getting security patches, and that in there is like a problem. So if those people who take on that new version aren't going to make sure they're continuously moving to 19, 18, and my experience tells me that it probably won't happen, because product priorities start getting in the way of these kind of low level kind of, I suppose, tech debt type priorities. It's just it always happens. It's just the reality. You end up with all these older versions that are not being patched. Something that is interesting that I came across when I was kind of reviewing this space a little bit a couple of months ago is that Zulu, they provide an MTS version, so a midterm support, which I thought was quite a nice idea. So that's obviously they're taking on the responsibility there too. So I think they would have, obviously, Java 11, it might have been Java 15 was the MTS, and then 17 was the LTS.
So it's like a middle ground between the LTSs.
Exactly, but they've taken on the responsibility to backport kind of patches and security fixes, whatever it might be, to that version, and provide a level of support for it, which I think is quite nice because it gives you that, if you did want to get so far, you could do. But obviously that's one vendor, one distribution. It's not it's not a kind of an ecosystem wide decision or option that's available, but it's quite a nice kind of way of.
Yeah, it's a nice take on the an alternative, and it gives you, I suppose, from their perspective, differentiator, something that can be.
No, definitely. I definitely kind of was looking at it thinking that's quite appealing, you know, and could be an interesting choice. So, yeah.
I feel like there's a bit of a culture shock for the Java developers because we were almost conditioned to very long release cycles in the early days of Java. So it's been a bit of a, I can understand. I see that, you know, I totally agree with all the reasons that I think the Java stewards Oracle have to make, and what the reasons why they want to increase things. It's just, you've got a community that's used to much longer release schedules. So the culture shock that you've gone from 3-4 years between releases to 6 months. So it's just a bit of a change.
I think that doesn't even just apply to Java though. Like if you think about software in general, like the whole industry over the past kind of 10 years has shifted to more frequent delivery, just as a way of working, haven't they? You know, like before, I mean, I got into Java, I think just as 8 was coming out. So you know, it's been fairly frequent from my experience anyway. So I haven't got those kind of longer term, but in terms of software delivery generally, like I remember you'd work on software releases for like 3 to 6 months before you delivered all this change. Whereas now it's like, I'll work on a software change for a few hours and then I'll push it to prod, you know, and you know, you kind of, it's just a different way of thinking, a different mentality. I think the tooling, the kind of, I suppose, the thinking, everything around the ecosystems is kind of just different now. People are starting to have different expectations. I'm sure there's still cultural kind of challenges that different people and organizations have to adapt to that.
Yeah.
But I think, it's, for me, it's a positive kind of place to be. I think moving, like delivering these releases more frequently gets more exposure of the newer features to people more earlier. Earlier feedback can only be good to kind of make the platform better and more stable. And obviously they do preview kind of releases of a lot of the things that are coming out.
That's something that I've wanted to, I've historically never done a lot with the preview releases or early access releases for Java, but with some of the upcoming work, especially because we had Ron on about Loom.
Ron Pressler,
Pressler. It's driven me to think I should look at those early releases and just give them a road test, so to speak, see what, try and do something with them to prepare for what the changes are going to be, be proactive in that way. I think from what you said then, I was wondering, are we bearing the fruit of what the CI/CD approach, continuous development? Are we slowly seeing that becoming more adopted over the wider software development industry? The more frequent releases of everything, that it's become the standard now, we're slowly transitioning to that.
I mean, over years, from my experience and things I've seen, I'd say yes, but I imagine there is still a kind of two ends of the scale. There'll be huge kind of portions of the industry that maybe aren't yet in that position where they're thinking like that. Whereas there'll be others that are like rushing ahead and kind of flying. And I think, I think in general, smaller, more frequent releases is a good thing. I think it depends who you are though. Like, I suppose I remember when this all came out, obviously from people who are having to build and maintain libraries, for example, open source libraries, and they're having to keep up with a new pace of change. There might have been some kind of contention there, but I reckon people have probably adapted now and, for the better, and kind of found new ways of working. There's always going to be more kind of people and places and organizations where they aren't yet kind of comfortable with that pace of change. and it's like you say, it's a cultural kind of thing, isn't it? It's kind of a mentality shift.
Yeah, and sometimes
which
it
isn't
can
easy.
take time. Yeah,
Definitely. But so, I mean, in general, I think it's good, but there's obviously always two sides to every story.
Yeah, as soon as you said that not everyone in the industry, and immediately I thought of, from a safety, mission critical systems, CI/CD is just not practical. You just can't work in that way.
Yeah, I always love the example of like, if you're going to kind of, I don't know if this is even true today, but I remember kind of hearing about like, well, I suppose you think back to like a satellite that got sent out into space like 20 or 30 years ago, the amount of kind of attention to detail that had to go into that up front to get the kind of software correct and safe and working before doing this big bang release of launching it and then actually finding out that it did work. It was kind of like, it feels hard to think about the same principles applying to that kind of problem, but I don't know. Maybe they do over the air software updates these days.
Yeah, I know.
Out to space.
I think on the Fuji podcast, James Gosling was talking, I want to say a few months ago now, it could have been when I was listening to it, about the challenges of the robotics company he worked at. And, the challenges of operating a system, not only software, but hardware in very remote and inhospitable environments, and the challenges you always have to have. I think he mentioned off the top of my head, you always have to have 3 of every system, 3 GPS systems,
right? Like backup. Kind of, if one fails, you've got some resiliency there.
Yeah, and it's a different set of challenges that you can't rely on, as you just said, over the air, because there is literally no way you can get that level of, even just being able to do an over the air update. It's such a, do you trust it to actually reboot and come back up? To reload that. It's such a challenge. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. I feel like I want to go and kind of read up on that now and find out how they actually do these things. But
I know.
Cool. Right. Well, I think we've kind of covered everything we want to talk about. So I think we can kind of wrap up there. So thanks, John, for kind of hosting this with me. And thanks everybody for listening.
Hopefully we'll do another one soon and have some more guests on.
Yeah. Cheers. See you later.
Thank you.